"Don't move." The hoarse roar ripped through the opulent air of the Aurelia restaurant, as brutal as a knife slashing through fine silk. A black shotgun barrel was pointed directly at the chest of a small, motionless waitress. Around her, the world had collapsed. The wealthy patrons, who just minutes before had been passing judgment on the universe, were now cowering under tables like terrified animals. Her name was Emily Walker, but in this hellish moment, she had no name. She was a target, the only defiance in a room that had completely surrendered. Yet, she didn't flinch. While the rest of the world descended into chaos, her own world became strangely silent. Her hazel eyes, which were usually downcast to avoid contemptuous gazes, now held a cold, sharp glint. She didn't see a screaming robber. She saw a vulnerable target. In the next 30 seconds, the quiet waitress reminded everyone of a primal truth. Heroes are not defined by the uniforms they wear, but by their actions when everyone else has chosen to surrender. Before the gunshot, the Aurelia restaurant was a perfect stage. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings like frozen waterfalls. The air was scented with truffle oil and entitlement. The patrons here didn't just come for dinner. They came to perform. Laughter was calculated, and the clinking of glasses was a statement of status. It was all a perfect play. Within that stage, Emily Walker was an invisible backstage worker. She had worked here for 6 months, always taking the night shift to earn extra tips, even if it meant facing the most ruthless customers. Her colleagues liked her because she never caused trouble. She cleared tables in silence, nodded at complaints, and never argued back, no matter how venomous their words were. This wasn't weakness, it was a choice. Emily had been in places where a small mistake could cost you your life, not just your pride. She had learned to choose her battles, and these people with their designer handbags and razor-sharp comments were not worth her energy. Her colleagues liked her because she never joined in the gossip in the kitchen, never complained about a tip or a difficult customer. She just worked, efficiently and silently. They thought she was shy, a country girl trying to make a living in the big city, but they didn't know that her silence was a shield, and her bowed head was a conscious choice. Emily had been in places where noise could attract a bullet, where a wrong look could ignite a bloodbath. She had learned to choose her battles, and the world of the Aurelia, with its unspoken wars of status and money, was not worth drawing her sword for. Tonight, the VIP table in the corner, the restaurant's most prized spot, was particularly loud. It belonged to Richard Vance, a financial mogul with slicked-back gray hair and a flashy gold Rolex on his wrist that he would brandish whenever he emphasized a point about the market. Seated opposite was his wife, Candace, a woman with a surgically perfected smile and sharp eyes that were always searching for flaws in others. Emily approached their table, carrying a bottle of Chateau Margaux, 1,982. She knew its price enough to pay her rent for a year. She carefully poured a small amount into Richard's glass for him to taste. He lifted the glass, not to savor it, but to scrutinize it. He swirled the wine, held it up to the candlelight, and his eyes narrowed in a judgmental squint. "There's a smudge," he declared, his tone as condescending as a judge who had just found incriminating evidence. He pointed to a completely clear spot on the rim of the glass. "I guess they don't teach you how to polish a glass in whatever hole you crawled out of." A brief silence fell over the table, then shattered by Candace's muffled laugh. "You're so picky, dear," she said, but her eyes were fixed on Emily with contempt. Her words were a defense, but her gaze was a mockery, joining her husband's. Emily didn't flinch. Her breathing remained steady. "My sincere apologies, sir. I will get you a new glass immediately," she said, her voice monotone, devoid of emotion. It was a response she had practiced hundreds of times. Don't react. Don't let them see they've gotten to you. As Emily turned her back, her footsteps steady and calm, she heard Candace whisper to her husband, just loud enough for her to hear, "Look at her. She has no class. I bet she's never been to a place like this." unless it was to clean the bathrooms. A familiar anger coiled in Emily's chest like a sleeping beast being woken. She gripped the tray in her hand, her knuckles white. She took a deep breath, forcing the beast back into its cage. She had faced far worse people with guns, not just words. When Emily stepped into the bright, noisy kitchen area, Martin Blake, the manager, blocked her path. He was a skinny man in an oversized suit with a constantly sweaty forehead. He lived in fear of the VIP customers and of his superiors, and that fear was always unloaded onto his subordinates. "What the hell were you doing out there?" he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "Did you offend the Vances? Do you know that one call from him could bring this entire restaurant down, let alone your little job? Next time, smile, bow your head. Understood?" Emily just looked at him, her eyes eerily still. "Understood," she replied. Her calmness seemed to infuriate him even more, but before he could say anything else, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and a strange, almost cunning smile flickered on his lips. He quickly turned and walked into his office, slamming the door shut. Emily stood there, alone in the kitchen's bustle. She felt that something was wrong. Martin's anxiety wasn't just from a complaint, it was something else, something deeper. Her invisible existence had taught her to observe, and she saw the small cracks in the Aurelia's perfect facade. She walked towards the bar to get more water. Her hand unconsciously touched her apron pocket, where a small, old, dog-eared photo lay. She didn't need to look at it, because the image was etched in her mind. A 19-year-old Emily, in a camouflage uniform, grinning widely, her arm around a teammate. Dusty, tired, but alive and full of purpose. She quickly pushed the memory away. That person had died in a desert somewhere. In a hidden corner of the restaurant, Alexander Reed put down his whiskey glass. He had witnessed everything, the arrogance of the Vances, the cowardice of the manager, and above all, the incredible resilience of the waitress. He had built his empire by seeing through people, recognizing potential where no one else did. And in this girl, he didn't see a victim. He saw a soldier in disguise. Such composure wasn't natural. It was forged in fire. He took another sip of his drink, his gaze still following the girl as she silently went about her work. He wondered what kind of fire had created her, and what would happen if someone, or something, was powerful enough to break through the facade she had so painstakingly built. He didn't know that the answer was very close. It was at the foot of the building, in a black van with no license plates, and it was about to kick down the doors of the Aurelia's kingdom. The symphony of luxury continued. Emily brought out a new, flawless glass and retreated into the shadows. She felt a strange tension in the air, not from the patrons, but from something deeper, like the menacing stillness before an earthquake. She glanced at Martin Blake, seeing him standing near the entrance, constantly caressing his phone, his eyes looking out into the hallway with an expectant look. And then, the earthquake hit. It didn't begin with a bang, but with a dry, brutal sound. Bam! The double oak doors, a symbol of the Aurelia's elegance, were kicked open as if they were made of cardboard. Two shadowy figures rushed in, moving with the speed of predators. Immediately following was a third, larger man, holding a short-barreled shotgun that looked out of place and grotesque in these refined surroundings. For a second, the entire restaurant froze. The music stopped. Conversations died out. All eyes were on the shattered doors. Disbelief was quickly replaced by recognition, and then by primal terror. Everyone on the floor. This is a robbery. The leader's hoarse roar shattered the silence, creating a tsunami of chaos. High-pitched screams tore through the air. Crystal glasses fell to the floor, shattering, their sounds like the wails of violated wealth. The beautiful evening gowns were dragged across the floor, now stained with red wine like blood. Richard Vance, the man who had just been judging the world, now had no composure left. He frantically pulled his wife under the table, his face flushed with fear. Candace shrieked, clutching her Hermes bag to her chest as if it were an infant. The second robber, a tall and somewhat clumsy man, grabbed the nearest patron within his reach. It was Chloe Bennett, the young model sitting at the table near the door. Fear had paralyzed her. The man pulled her up, pressing the cold barrel of his handgun against her temple. Chloe sobbed, her expensive mascara beginning to run, mixing with her tears down her beautiful cheeks. "Please, please, don't kill me," she begged, her voice lost in sobs. In the middle of this living hell, Emily was an island of stillness. She was standing not far away, her hand still holding a silver tray. When the first sound rang out, she didn't scream, didn't run. Instinct took over before her mind could even react. Her body tensed, every sense pushed to its maximum. She didn't see a mess of chaos. She saw a tactical picture. 3 enemies. The leader, a big man, seemed to be the commander, controlling the center of the room. The second man, tall and lanky, was holding a hostage. His position was vulnerable, easily attacked from behind. The third, moving along the walls, was collecting wallets and jewelry. He seemed to be the least experienced. Weapons: 1 shotgun with a wide range but slow rate of fire, 2 semi-automatic handguns. Environment: plenty of cover, tables, chairs, food carts, good lighting, 2 known exits. In a few short seconds, Emily's brain had processed all of that information, not as a waitress, but as Sergeant Walker, a Special Forces combat medic. The beast she had kept caged for so long was now scratching furiously at the bars. Her stillness, her difference, caught the attention of the leader. He turned, seeing her still standing tall in a sea of people prostrated on the floor. He strode toward her, the shotgun barrel aimed directly at her chest. "Are you deaf?" I said. "Get on the ground." Whispers began to ripple from under the tables. They were not words of encouragement, they were accusations. "That idiot," Candace hissed, her voice full of hatred. "She's challenging them. She's going to get us all killed." Martin Blake, his face as white as a ghost, stammered from his hiding place near the bar. "Emily, please, just listen to them. Don't be stubborn. Get down." They didn't see a person calculating. They only saw a defiant one, an anomaly that threatened their fragile safety. Their judgment, even in a matter of life and death, had not changed. To them, she was still just a stupid waitress. But those words were like a breeze to Emily. She didn't hear them. Her entire being was now narrowed down, focused on the man in front of her. She looked at the gun barrel, then deep into his eyes through his mask. She saw anger, cruelty, but she also saw something else. A hesitation, a lack of certainty. This guy was just a thug, not a soldier. He was used to bullying the weak, not facing someone who wasn't afraid. Instinct told her this was the moment. The beast in the cage was no longer scratching. It had broken free of the bars. Sergeant Walker had returned, and she was about to begin her hunt. Emily's world contracted into a narrow tunnel, and at the end of that tunnel was the black shotgun barrel of the leader. The screams, sobs, and vicious accusations from under the tables all dissolved into a meaningless buzz. All that remained was her heartbeat, not a frantic rhythm of fear, but a strong, steady battle drum, pumping adrenaline into every muscle fiber. She exhaled slowly, a technique practiced thousands of times in places far hotter and more dangerous than this. The breath calmed every nerve, sharpening every sense. It was the final stillness before the storm. Seconds 1 to 5. Disruption. She didn't back down. She didn't surrender. She did something that no robber or patron could have anticipated. With a sudden yet fully intentional movement, she flung the silver tray in her hand. It didn't fly towards the leader. It flew to the left, towards a metal cart full of glasses and dishes waiting to be cleared. A loud, chaotic crash rang out, like a small explosion. It was a sensory attack, a disruption of the pattern. By instinct, the third robber, who was busy grabbing valuables, and the leader both startled and turned their heads toward the sound. The man holding Chloe was also momentarily distracted, his grip on the girl loosening slightly. Just a single second of distraction. But in Emily's world, a second was an eternity. Seconds says, até 15. Swift neutralization. The moment their eyes left her, Emily lunged. She didn't run. She glided, her center of gravity low, each step silent and purposeful. She moved like a ghost through the overturned tables. Her first target was the third robber, the nearest and least vigilant one. He was still staring blankly at the cart, the gun in his hand lowered. Emily approached him from his blind spot. She didn't use a fist. Fists could make noise and break bones in her hand. She used an elbow, a natural, hard, and effective weapon, a lightning-fast strike to his temple. There was no scream, just a dull thud. He collapsed to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut, completely unconscious. Emily didn't stop to admire her work. She was already headed toward her second target, the tall, lanky man holding Chloe. He had noticed his accomplice was down and turned back in a panic. But it was too late. Emily was already there. She didn't try to grab the gun. That was a risky move. Instead, she used the nearest object. A silver fork lay on the floor. She snatched it up, her palm familiar with the feel of cold metal. As the robber swung his gun toward her, she dodged, simultaneously stabbing the fork hard into the back of his hand, holding the weapon. "Ah!" He roared in pain. His fingers spasmed and the gun fell to the ground. The pain completely broke his focus on the hostage. Emily took advantage of the opportunity. A precise leg sweep to his ankle made him lose his balance. As he staggered, she was already behind him, one hand tightening a chokehold, the other twisting his injured arm behind his back in an unbreakable lock. He was neutralized, left only to groan in agony. Seconds, 16 to 30, confrontation and conclusion. Two accomplices were down in less than 15 seconds. The leader turned back, his eyes wide with horror behind his mask. The confidence of a predator had vanished, replaced by the panic of the hunted. He raised the shotgun, aiming it at Emily, but his hands were trembling. Emily pushed Chloe away, yelling, "Get down!" Then she faced the leader. Between them was a rectangular dining table. What the hell are you?" he stammered. Emily didn't answer. She pushed the table hard toward him. It wasn't just a wooden table. It was a weapon, an obstacle, a tool to break his concentration. The robber instinctively stumbled backward, tripping over a chair. Capitalizing on his moment of unbalance, Emily lunged forward, not over the table, but sliding underneath it. She emerged right at his feet. The robber tried to point the shotgun down, but he was too slow. Emily grabbed the barrel with one hand, pushing it aside, while her other hand used a technique she had practiced until it became second nature. She didn't try to pull the gun away. She used the robber's own weight and momentum against him. A swift spin, a leverage on his elbow, and a sickening crack echoed as his shoulder bone dislocated. The leader screamed a high-pitched cry of pain, and the shotgun fell to the floor. Emily didn't give him a moment to recover. A powerful knee strike to the stomach made him double over, and a precise chop to the back of his neck finished it. He collapsed, unconscious. Aftermath. The medic's instinct. Silence. A heavy, absolute silence blanketed the entire restaurant. People slowly raised their heads, their eyes wide, their mouths agape. They looked at the three motionless robbers. They looked at the waitress who was standing there, her chest rising and falling lightly. But she didn't stay still. Her eyes immediately scanned the room, not for more threats, but for the injured. She saw an elderly patron clutching his arm, blood soaking through his white shirt. The soldier's instinct faded, and the combat medic's instinct took over. She ran to him, kneeling down by his side. "Let me see," she said, her voice now not cold but full of calm and certainty. "The blood. There's so much blood." His wife sobbed. "It's okay. It's just a minor artery in the arm. Hold still," Emily commanded with authority. She tore a nearby silk tablecloth, quickly folding it into a thick pad. She placed it on the wound and used the patron's own tie to cinch it tightly into an improvised tourniquet. "Hold it tight like this," she instructed the wife. "Don't let go until the paramedics arrive." Her fingers moved with the precision of a surgeon. Every action had a purpose, without a moment of hesitation. She had done this countless times before, on floors not of marble but of sand, under the light not of crystal chandeliers but of flares. When the police burst in, they found an unbelievable scene. An elderly officer, who appeared to be the commander, stopped in his tracks. He looked at the three expertly neutralized robbers, then at the professional bandage on the patron's arm. He looked at Emily, who was checking the victim's pulse. "That technique," he muttered to his deputy. "The arm lock, the approach. I've only ever seen it in Special Forces training manuals." Those words, though just a whisper, spread throughout the room. They planted a question in everyone's mind, a mix of awe and bewilderment. Who was this quiet waitress, after all? The flashing red and blue lights from outside cast a ghostly glow on the still stunned faces inside the Aurelia. The wail of police and ambulance sirens had replaced the jazz music. The room, once a symbol of order and luxury, was now a chaotic crime scene. Detectives walked around, taking photos, placing yellow markers next to shell casings and spilled puddles of wine. Emily stood huddled against a marble column, trying to revert to her invisible role, but it was useless. She was now the center of attention. The eyes fixed on her were no longer full of contempt, but a strange mixture of fear, curiosity, and a reluctant gratitude. She had saved them, but the way she had done it made them uneasy. She wasn't like them. She was too different. The tension peaked when a young detective returned, after taking an initial statement from one of the three robbers, the tall, lanky one Emily had neutralized with the silver fork. "He said there was an inside man," the detective reported to the commanding officer. "Someone from this restaurant." They provided the security layout, the manager's schedule, and information about Miss Bennett's diamond necklace. A wave of murmuring spread through the room. An inside man? Immediately, heads turned towards Emily. Their twisted logic kicked in. Who was the most suspicious person? The strange waitress who had just transformed into a fighting machine. Richard Vance, who had regained a bit of his composure after being reassured by the police, was the first to speak, albeit in a whisper to those around him. "See, I told you. She was too calm. I'll bet the cut wasn't big enough, so she flipped. It was a perfect act. But..." And Martin Blake, the manager, saw a way out, a glimmer of hope in his panicked eyes. He seized the opportunity like a drowning man grasping for a lifeline. "That's right, it was her," he shouted, his voice a bit too loud, a bit too desperate. He pointed a trembling finger at Emily. I saw her sneakily making a call in the kitchen right before the robbery. I knew something was off. A normal waitress could never do something like that. She must be the mastermind. Arrest her." And he panted, his eyes wide, trying to convince everyone with feigned indignation. His accusation, however baseless, sowed a poisonous seed of doubt in the air. Emily just stood there, silently watching him. She didn't defend herself. She didn't react. She just watched, and in her calm eyes, Martin saw a judgment more terrifying than any accusation. But his charade didn't last long. The commanding officer, an older man with years of experience, raised a hand to silence him. He had just received a tablet from the technical team. He scrolled through the screen, his face unreadable. "We just pulled the data from the disposable phone the leader dropped," he said, his voice level but authoritative. "The last call and a series of messages over the past 2 days all came from one number. And that number..." He paused, looking up, his gaze sharp as a dagger locking onto Martin Blake, "is registered in your name." Martin collapsed. All color drained from his face. No, that's impossible. There must be a mistake," he stammered, backing away. "There's no mistake, Mr. Blake," the officer said, handing the tablet to another patrolman. "We have enough evidence to arrest you for conspiring to commit armed robbery and endangering the lives of others. Cuff him." "No, it was her. That bitch framed me." Martin shrieked like a cornered animal as two officers moved in, twisting his arms behind his back. He thrashed uselessly, his frantic accusations getting lost in the chaos. Amidst the commotion, a sound rang out, cutting through the noise. Clapping, one hand, then two, slow, deliberate, and full of meaning. The whole room fell silent, turning towards the source of the sound. Alexander Reed was standing there, brushing an imaginary speck of dust from his suit jacket. He wasn't looking at Martin, he was looking at Emily, and he was the only one clapping. "He was right about one thing," Alexander said, his voice low and resonant, easily overpowering the remaining chatter. "A normal person couldn't do that." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Because she's not normal, she's extraordinary." He began to walk, stepping over broken glass and messy tables, heading directly toward Emily. Every step he took exuded an unmistakable confidence and power. The other patrons parted, making way for him as if he were royalty. He stopped right in front of Emily, close enough for her to see the genuine admiration in his grey eyes. "I don't know what your past is, Miss Walker, and frankly, I don't care. What I do care about is what I saw tonight. Courage, skill, and an extraordinary composure in the face of danger." He didn't give a long speech. Alexander Reed was a man of action. He took a Mont Blanc pen from his inner jacket pocket and a sleek, minimalist black metal business card. He flipped it over to the blank backside and wrote a few words in a strong, decisive hand. Then he handed it to Emily. Her hand, the same hand that had just neutralized 3 robbers, hesitated slightly before taking the card. It was colder and heavier than she expected. She looked down. The front was engraved with a sophisticated laser-etched inscription: Alexander Reed, founder and CEO, Reed Industries. And on the back was the handwritten note: "Head of Security, start tomorrow." There was no phone number, no invitation. It was a statement, a declaration. That action, brief but powerful, was like a judge's gavel, silencing all whispers, all doubts. It was the highest form of recognition, given by the most powerful man in the room, right in front of the people who had treated her like dirt. Martin Blake, being escorted away, fell silent. Richard and Candace Vance looked at the floor, their faces burning with shame, and Emily, for the first time in a long night, felt the shield around her begin to crack. Not from fear, but from a strange feeling, a feeling she hadn't felt in a very, very long time. Validation. The night was late. The red and blue lights of the police cars and ambulances gradually thinned out and then disappeared, returning the street below to its usual silence. Inside the Aurelia, the chaos had been replaced by a strange, heavy quiet. The patrons who were lucky enough to be unharmed were allowed to leave after giving their statements, departing in their luxury cars, carrying a dramatic story to tell for months to come. Only the restaurant staff, the last few detectives, and a sense of unreality remained among the jumbled tables and chairs. Emily stood there, Alexander Reed's metal business card still cool in her palm. It felt like an object from another world, a world she had deliberately turned her back on. Everyone kept a respectful distance from her. Her colleagues, who just hours before had treated her like a ghost, now looked at her with a mix of awe and trepidation. The bartender, a young man, brought her a bottle of water without her having to ask. He placed it down and backed away, as if she were a bomb about to go off. She didn't belong here anymore. She knew it, with a slight nod to the commanding officer, who thanked her for her actions. Emily turned and walked toward the staff locker room. It was a small, cramped room that always smelled of bleach, a total contrast to the luxury outside. It used to be her sanctuary, a place where she could shed her fake service smile and return to her own silence. But now, it felt like a cramped cage. She opened her personal locker, a grey metal box. Inside were a few personal items and her regular clothes, a faded pair of jeans and a simple grey t-shirt. She slowly took off her uniform. The black apron, the white shirt, the trousers. They weren't just clothes. They were a disguise, a facade she had worn for the past 6 months to hide who she really was. She thought that by becoming invisible, she could heal her inner wounds. She held the uniform in her hands for a moment, then didn't fold it. She simply placed it on the empty shelf inside the locker and slammed the door shut. A dry clank echoed in the silent room. It was a decisive act, a farewell. She was shedding an old skin. When she walked out of the restaurant in her own clothes, the fresh night air of the city filled her lungs. It felt so different. She no longer had to stoop, no longer had to bow her head. She took a deep breath, a breath of freedom she hadn't felt in a very long time. The street ahead was empty, with only the yellow-orange streetlights casting pools of light on the damp pavement. She wasn't in a hurry to go home. Instead, she walked, with no specific destination. She needed time to process everything, to allow the person she had tried to bury to rise again. She stopped under a tree, away from the streetlights. Her hand unconsciously found its way to her jeans pocket, where she had kept the old photo. She pulled it out. The photo was dog-eared, its colors faded with time, but the image was still clear. It was an Emily from another era. 19 years old, her face still held a hint of innocence, but her eyes were filled with determination. She wore a camouflage uniform stained with desert dust, her hair neatly tucked under a soft hat. She was laughing, a full, radiant laugh, her arms slung over the shoulders of 2 much larger teammates. Behind them was a Humvee and the burnt orange sunset sky of a foreign land. She had hated this photo, hated her own smile in it. Because just a few weeks after this photo was taken, one of those 2 teammates never came back. And she, the combat medic, had been there, had tried desperately to pull him back from the clutches of death, but failed. The memory of that night, of the smell of blood and dust, of the helplessness, had haunted her, had made her run from everything related to her past. She had run from the uniform, from the skills, and most importantly, from herself. But tonight, looking at the photo again, she no longer saw the pain. She saw strength. She saw camaraderie. She saw a young woman who had bravely faced the worst the world could throw at her. Tonight, the skills she had tried so hard to forget were the very things that had saved everyone's lives. The instinct of a soldier, a protector, wasn't a curse. It was a part of her. A tear rolled down her cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sorrow. It was a tear of release. She didn't put the photo away immediately. She held it in her palm for a long time, feeling the familiarity of the worn paper edges. Her thumb gently stroked the smiling face of her fallen teammate, not with regret, but with a silent greeting. Then, for the first time in years, a faint, genuine, and proud smile spread across her lips. It wasn't the forced smile to please customers. It was the smile of Sergeant Walker. She put the photo back in her wallet, not to hide it, but to cherish it. It was no longer a burden, but a reminder. She raised her head high, looking at the skyscrapers glittering in the night. Tomorrow, one of those buildings would be her new workplace, a new challenge, a new life. She didn't know what awaited her, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She walked on, with a steady and decisive stride, her straight silhouette casting a long shadow on the street. Emily Walker, the waitress, was left behind in the grey metal locker of the Aurelia. The person walking through the city's night was Emily Walker, the survivor, the protector, a silent hero who had finally found her voice and her own path.